Hi, I'm Danita Orders, and I'm known in the SCA as Countess Toryn Seven Stitches, and this is my video tutorial on how to make a rawhide wrap sword. So first, a disclaimer: rawhide wrap swords are not legal in every kingdom of the SCA, so before you make one to play with, be sure and check your rule book and make sure that it's legal where you live. The biggest question I get about rawhide wrap swords is, why do you do it? And the best answer for that is simply to increase the life of the rattan. Before we started wrapping our swords in rawhide, we were getting about 3, maybe 4 months out of the rattan before it completely broomed out and the sword was unusable. With the rawhide wrap, we get 6 to 8 months or even longer out of the sword, and since rattan is not free, it really is a nice economical savings. So I'm going to go through a list of materials that you need. Alright, so welcome back to the tutorial. To get started, I'm going to go through a list of things that you need to have if you're going to have a rawhide wrap sword. The first is your piece of rattan. So this is a regular piece of rattan we got from Master Eric, and before you cover it with rawhide, you do need to make any modifications to the rattan that you would normally make to the blade, such as planing the blade sides down or modifying the handle. The fellow that I'm making the sword for does not make those types of modifications, so we're able to go ahead and wrap straight on to the natural rattan. It is cut to length, however. So that's the first thing, of course, you need. The second thing you're going to need is your rawhide. There are lots of different types of rawhide leathers that are out there. I get a lot of questions about this. What kind of rawhide do I use? And I use rawhide from Tandy Leather. I'm here in Fort Worth, Texas, which is the worldwide headquarters of Tandy, so it makes it super easy for me to get good leather, but they do sell online. Their pieces come in very large sheets where you can get 7 or even 8 swords out of a sheet, so it makes it very economical. If you're able to shop in person, look for a piece that is got an even thickness throughout and with fewer holes. That makes for nice wraps. This piece, as you can see, the rawhide is about the thickness of a cardboard box. It is a pretty good thickness there, and you want to have that as even throughout the piece of rawhide as you possibly can. Something else you're going to need for this project is a ruler. I like 2 different kinds, a flexible ruler and a straight ruler, a pencil, a Sharpie marker, a pair of metal shears. I have found that these things are the absolute best things in the world to cut rawhide with. Much safer than using a carpet knife. You'll also need a scrap piece of wood and a multi-punch. This I got from Tandy as well. Unfortunately, I broke a little tong off of her, but this is absolutely key to the project, and you'll see how we use this a little bit later. A hammer to use your punch, and then for the sewing, I like to use these, which are curved sewing needles that I bought from Tandy as well. They look like that. They have a very large eye and very, very sharp, and you'll see the need for those a little bit later. And you'll need some kind of sewing thread, whether you use natural sinew, synthetic sinew, whatever color you like. It really doesn't matter. I like to match the color of the rawhide. You'll also need a pair of pliers to help you pull the needles through if they get stuck. These really help. And something else that I made to really help me is I made myself a couple of sewing thimbles, and I put them on my fingers like this. When you're pulling the sinew, it really kind of digs into your fingers, and having something there really helps protect your fingers when you're doing the sewing. You'll also need a roll of tape. And that's it. Let's get started. Okay, so now that you have all of your materials gathered, we're going to start covering the sword. The first thing we have to do is measure your sword and find out what size piece of rawhide we actually need. So with our sword, of course, we don't need to cover where the basket hilt is going to be. So we measure out where the basket hilt is going to actually go, mark that, and then we measure from this line to the edge of the sword, so where we're actually going to cover, and that is going to be on this sword right at 22 inches. That's our first measurement. We're then going to get a measurement of the base of the wrap which on this blade is right at 4¼ inches. And then we're going to measure at the tip of the sword, which is right at 4½ inches. So we're going to have a little bit of a lopsided rectangle with this, where one side of the rectangle is going to be at 4½ and the other is going to be at 4¼ And we're going to measure that out, mark it, and then cut it. That'll be the next step. All right, so I've got my piece of rawhide here, and I've already got a straight edge from where I made another sword. So the first measurement I need to make is to mark out 22 inches. Hopefully I've got 22 inches here. And I do, yay. Okay, so we're gonna put a little line here at 22. My first measurement on this end is gonna be at 4½, right there. And then my second measurement over on this end is going to be 4¼ right there. And then I'm going to measure this top end to make sure I'm still at 22. And I am pretty close right there. And I'm going to draw a line for myself. I like to use pencil on rawhide because in case you make a mistake, you can fix it. And also it disappears in the water. So now that you have your nice line drawn out on your rawhide, you can begin to cut. All right, so now we're ready to cut our rawhide. There's lots of different ways to cut rawhide. I have found that the easiest and safest way is to use a pair of metal shears. I actually picked these up at a yard sale for $1. Hopefully you can get lucky and get some too. But what you're gonna do is just simply follow the lines that you just drew for yourself and cut your rawhide. And it cuts it really easy. After you get your rawhide piece cut out, you'll want to run it under some cold water in your sink until it gets pliable. Then you'll want to roll it up like that and stick it in a cold glass of water in your refrigerator overnight. Okay, so this is a little movie magic, but this is my rawhide piece. Put it in a glass in the refrigerator overnight. Before I went to bed last night, I changed the water just to keep the water fresh. An overnight soak should be absolutely fine for your rawhide. Do not, under any circumstances, run your rawhide under hot water. It will ruin your rawhide. Soak it all in cold water, okay? So I'm gonna take it out of the water and dry it off just a tiny bit, and then we're gonna lay it out to get it punched. All right, so now that you have your cut and soaked piece of rawhide that's cut to your dimensions, you're gonna notice that your rawhide got really puffed up with the water once it rehydrated. So sewing through this thickness of rawhide is really hard to do. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pre-punch some holes for you to sew with. This is where your multi-tool comes in. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually punch, I'm gonna mark it with a Sharpie just to let you guys see, about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the rawhide. We're gonna put the multi-punch down and we're gonna hit it with a hammer. Until we actually clear through the rawhide to make some holes in there. And they're hard to see, that's why I marked them. We're gonna punch all the way down the length of the cut sides of the rawhide on both sides to make it easier to sew. And that's our next step. Okay. Okay, so now you have your piece of rawhide leather that has been soaked and you have punched holes in on both sides all the way down. I then lay out pieces of the blue masking tape. I use the blue, you can use whatever kind of masking tape you like, but put the sticky side up. And you're gonna lay your rawhide piece right in the middle. Then you're gonna lay your rattan down like that. And this is what I call rolling up your victory sushi. Bring it up in the middle, and whenever you bring the tape to it, the tape is gonna stick to itself. It won't stick to the rawhide. You just go down either side like that. And the only reason we're doing this is to help us when we're stitching. That's it. This is not absolutely necessary to do, but I have found that it really helps out whenever you're sewing. So now we're ready to sew. The next step is threading the needles. Okay, so now we're ready to sew. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to thread our needles with one long piece, about 4 times the length of the area that you're going to sew, with some wax linen or artificial wax linen, whatever you want to do, even some sinew. So we've got our 2 curved needles and one long piece where I've got it doubled. So to start our stitch, we're going to put one needle, the hole on one side, and one needle into the hole on the other side. Grab both needles and pull. So the middle of your thread should be touching the rattan. Immediately tie a nice knot. I'm going to mention something while I'm tying this knot is whenever you're sewing, your seam should not be on the edge side of your blade. The seam should be on your flat. Tie a nice tight knot, and you'll immediately see the need for your thimbles. Put your thimbles on, and that way whenever you're pulling your knot tight, you can really use some strength. Now we're going to start the baseball stitch. The baseball stitch goes like this. You're going to take one of your needles and come up through the hole on the left side from the underneath. You're going to take your opposite needle and come up through the hole on the other side at the very next hole. You're just going to keep that pattern up. The same needle that's in your hand, you're going to come up through on the left side now. Switch needles. And now you're going to come up from the bottom on the right side. Pull tight. Needle still in your hand. Take that same needle and come up through the left side. Switch needles. And now you're going to come up through the hole that you punched on the right side. Now's a really good time to stop and tie a knot. Pull tight. Hold as tight as you can. Tie a knot. And you just keep on stitching the whole way down the length of the blade. Okay, so now that you're done stitching, and what you've done is you've stitched about 4 or 5 stitches and tied a knot all the way down. Again, make sure that you're stitching down the flat side of your blade and not the edge. Now that you're down at the end, do not worry if this happens. This happens a lot. Whenever you rehydrate the hide, some strange things sometimes happen. Don't worry. That's why I always start at the tip of the sword and work down towards the hilt, because this is the area that doesn't matter so much if it gets covered. So leave yourself a nice long tail of string, and what you're going to do is you're going to wrap the tails around the rattan 2 or 3 times. Take your scissors and you're just going to tuck them in as tightly as you can. Like that. There. Make sure your seam is straight, and now all that's left is to let your sword dry. You can put it outside, in a hot car, in front of a refrigerator, wherever, but it's going to take about 3 or 4 days for it to dry. The rawhide will be wet longer than you think possible. And then once it's dry, you're ready to go. Welcome back. Now this sword has been drying for a solid week, and I want you to notice how much the rawhide has drawn up at the end, and also the gap that's now in between the stitches. So this highlights just how much that the rawhide, once it dries, it's going to reduce in size and tighten down on your rattan, but also the fact that we do not want this seam to be on any kind of striking edge. Down here at the end of the sword, where it was not quite even, you see that this is dried into a nice little point. That's why we always put this down by the hilt or the basket. So this is going to be covered by the basket edge. And we're all nice and dry. This has been drying for a solid week. So now we're ready for taping and we can finish this sword. Thanks for watching.